Have you ever thought about what it would be like to face a challenge so big, so impossible, that it just feels completely overwhelming?
Yeah, like one of those moments where you just think, how could anyone overcome this?
Well, today we're looking at a story that I think really exemplifies that. It's the story of the Brooklyn Bridge.
Of course, a story we all know.
Yeah, but not just the bridge itself, it's also the people who actually made it a reality.
The individuals who brought it to life.
Exactly. And especially um, a pretty incredible woman named Emily Warren Roebling.
Ah, Emily Warren Roebling. Now, some listeners might have heard of the Roebling men, John the engineer and his son Washington.
Right. But Emily's story, it often gets overshadowed.
Mm.
And it's really one of strength and incredible intellect and just pure determination.
I think it's really fascinating how often the contributions of women throughout history are kind of just pushed aside, and Emily's story really challenges that.
It really does. Let's go back to the 1860s in America.
Okay, back in time we go.
Imagine Brooklyn and New York, two separate cities,
Separated by what?
the East River. And back then, the only way to cross was by ferry.
Oh, wow. So you're at the mercy of the weather, the tides. I mean, that sounds pretty dangerous.
It was. There were constant delays, and it was really risky.
So obviously people wanted a more reliable way to get across.
Absolutely. They needed a way to connect these two essential hubs. But it was a huge challenge.
A challenge that needed a visionary, I guess. Someone to sort of dream up the impossible.
And that's where John Roebling comes in.
A renowned bridge engineer, right?
Yeah, he was. And he had this idea for a suspension bridge, something bigger and more complex than anything that had ever been built before. He envisioned the Brooklyn Bridge.
It's incredible to think about the kind of innovation, the daring to even think of something like that back then.
I know. But John Roebling, he wasn't just a dreamer. He was also a master builder.
So he was the one to actually bring this dream to life.
He was. And he had his son, Washington, who was also a talented engineer, helping him.
A family affair?
It was. And alongside Washington was his wife, Emily Warren Roebling. And she was a woman who had an extraordinary education for a woman of her time.
Now, you have to tell me more about this.
Well, Emily, she was educated at the Georgetown Academy of the Visitation, which was a school for girls, but she studied algebra, geometry, and even the sciences.
Seriously?
Yeah. At that time, those were subjects that were considered for men only.
That's so interesting. I mean, it makes you wonder how many other brilliant minds were just, lost because of those kinds of limitations.
It's a good question. But unfortunately, before the bridge construction could even really get started, tragedy struck the Roebling family.
Oh, no. What happened?
Well, during a final survey of the bridge site, John Roebling was fatally injured.
You're kidding.
It was a ferry accident, of all things.
Oh, the irony. The man who dreamed of a safer way to cross the river.
I know, it's heartbreaking. And with his passing, the whole weight of the project, his legacy, it all fell on his son, Washington.
That's a lot to carry.
It was. And it wasn't just the pressure. There were also a lot of dangers involved in building a bridge like this, especially when they were working in those underwater chambers, the pneumatic caissons.
Ah, the caissons. I've heard those were incredibly dangerous.
They were vital for building the foundations, but they were also a breeding ground for a mysterious illness.
Caisson disease, right?
Yes, or what we now know as decompression sickness.
Imagine spending hours in those cramped chambers, breathing in pressurized air, and then coming back up too quickly.
It could have devastating effects on the body. And unfortunately, Washington wasn't spared.
So what happened?
His health just deteriorated rapidly after he had a severe episode of caisson disease. The symptoms are awful: excruciating pain, paralysis, and sometimes even death.
It's hard to believe they didn't understand the risks back then.
I know. And as a result of his illness, Washington was left bedridden. He was seemingly unable to continue overseeing the bridge's construction.
Oh, wow. Can you imagine to put so much into a project and then have it taken away from you like that?
It's devastating. But this is where Emily's story takes a really remarkable turn. She steps in not just to take care of her husband, but to become something much, much more.
This is where it gets really interesting. I'm hooked.
Me too.
So Emily really stepped up in a big way. She started out acting as Washington's connection to the outside world, basically, relaying messages back and forth to the engineers and workers.
Yeah. That had to be frustrating for Washington, though, right? Not being able to be there in person.
Absolutely. And so Emily, well, she became more than just a messenger. She became his voice, his eyes on the project, and really his partner.
So she really got into the nitty-gritty of the bridge design.
She did. I mean, she was studying her father-in-law's plans. She was talking to the engineers constantly and just absorbing every little detail.
Wow, so she wasn't just, like, delivering messages. She was making decisions, solving problems, making sure Washington's vision was becoming a reality.
Exactly. She became completely essential. I mean, can you picture this? A woman in the late 1800s surrounded by all these men, talking about stress calculations and cable tensions and all the complexities of moving these giant pieces of the bridge.
I can imagine that raised some
Oh,
eyebrows.
you bet. I mean, some people saw her brilliance, her dedication, but others saw her as this, well, this anomaly, a woman in a man's world.
Did people try to, like, undermine her?
I'm sure of it. There were doubts, whispers, probably even outright attempts to push her out, but Emily, she just kept going. She had a bridge to build, right?
She did, and she wasn't going to let anything stop her.
You know, there's this really great story that shows how people's opinions of her started to change. There was this dinner at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and Rossi W. Raymond, a mining engineer, he gave a toast. And in his speech, he compared Emily to a goddess.
A goddess.
Yeah. He was talking about how she was overseeing this great work, how intelligent she was, and how gracefully she was handling everything.
Wow. That's a pretty incredible comparison, especially coming from someone in that field.
It was a real turning point. Emily, she was no longer just, the engineer's wife. She was a respected leader in her own right.
But the biggest test of her leadership was still to come,
Right.
when she led that delegation across the unfinished bridge.
Oh, yeah. That's the one. Imagine this. Emily walking across this partially built bridge with a group of important people, the wind whipping around them, the East River churning way down below.
It must have been terrifying.
But she did it. And it wasn't just for show. It was a way of proving to everyone that she understood this bridge inside and out, that she could handle its weaknesses, its strengths, and that she knew exactly how the construction was progressing.
She was proving herself.
She was, and it worked. From that moment on, Emily's role as a leader, as an engineer, as someone who was absolutely crucial to the bridge's success, that was solidified.
And then, after years of work, all the struggles, finally, the grand opening arrived.
May 1883. Can you imagine the scene? The crowds, the excitement, the Brooklyn Bridge, this incredible feat of engineering, finally complete, connecting not just two cities, but really two worlds.
What a moment for Emily. To
Yeah.
see it all come together after everything she'd done.
I know. And even though officially Washington was still the chief engineer, the truth was Emily's contribution was, well, it was monumental.
But did people acknowledge that at the time?
They did, in a way. Abramus Hewitt, he was a key figure in the project, and he gave a speech at the opening, praising everyone, of course, John Roebling's vision, Washington's skill, all the workers who risked their lives. But then he turned his attention to Emily.
What did he say?
He compared her to those goddesses from ancient myths,
Yeah.
the ones who watched over these great works, these incredible feats of construction. He was basically saying that Emily was the guiding force, the protector, the one who made sure the bridge was a success.
He was giving her credit.
He was. He even said the bridge was an everlasting monument to the self-sacrificing devotion of a woman. He acknowledged her, even if it was in a bit of a roundabout way.
And that wasn't the end of Emily's story, was it?
Not even close. The bridge, that was just one chapter in her pretty remarkable life.
It's amazing to think about everything Emily accomplished. I mean, she navigated this male-dominated world. She helped this massive project to completion. She really didn't back down from any challenge.
And she didn't stop there. The bridge, that was really just the start of a whole new chapter for her.
Right, because she had all this knowledge in other areas, too, like from her education.
Exactly. She went to the Georgetown Academy of the Visitation, remember? And she didn't just study the typical things for women back then. She learned algebra, geometry, the sciences.
She really had a strong foundation to build on. And it allowed her to, really thrive in all these other areas. Like, for instance, she was involved in editing and publishing a journal for a local pastor, Reverend Silas Constant.
That's right. It might seem like a total shift from engineering, but it actually came from a place of, well, almost regret, I guess you could say.
Oh, how so?
So in the preface to the journal, Emily talks about how she once burned a bunch of old family papers. She thought they were just, clutter. But later, she really regretted destroying them. She called them links in the chain connecting the past with the present.
It's funny how we don't always realize the value of things until they're gone.
Exactly. And so By working on Reverend Constance's journal, she was kind of making up for that. She was helping to preserve history.
That makes sense. It's
Yeah.
like she felt this responsibility to make sure those stories weren't lost. And of course, we can't forget about her work advocating for social causes and women's rights.
Absolutely. Remember that speech she gave at NYU, A Wife's Disabilities?
Yeah, that title definitely makes you think.
In the speech, she argues for women to have equal rights under the law, the right to vote, own property, have the same opportunities in education and jobs.
She was way ahead of her time.
She was, and she used her own experiences to make her point, talking about the struggles she faced as a woman in a male-dominated field.
Powerful stuff. And she wasn't just talking the talk, right? She was involved in all sorts of organizations.
Yeah, like the Daughters of the American Revolution and the Federation of Women's Clubs. She held leadership positions, organized events, really pushed for change.
It's incredible how much she did. Engineer, advocate, wife, mother. It's like she had endless energy.
And on top of all that, she even found time to travel. In 1896, she went to Europe all by herself.
Wow. That was a pretty bold move back then. Did she, like, keep a journal or something?
I'm not sure about a journal, but we know she had some amazing experiences. She was even received by royalty, Princess Christian of Schleswig-Holstein at Buckingham Palace. Imagine that. The woman who helped build the Brooklyn Bridge, meeting European royalty.
That's quite a picture.
And it didn't stop there. She was also at the coronation of Tsar Nicholas II in Russia. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
So she witnessed all these historic events. And then she came back to the U.S. and went on a lecture tour.
She did, sharing her stories and insights with everyone. She must have been a fascinating speaker.
I bet. You know, there's this one anecdote that really shows Emily's personality. It's from a letter she wrote to her son in 1898.
What did she say?
Well, he was talking about the bridge. And she kind of jokingly said that she had more brains, common sense, and know-how, generally, than any two engineers.
Huh. I love that. She knew her worth.
She did. And then she went on to say, but for me, the Brooklyn Bridge would never have had the name Roebling in any way connected with it.
Wow. She wasn't afraid to claim her contributions.
Not at all. And you know it's true. Emily Warren Roebling, she was a force to be reckoned with. She faced challenges head-on, she pushed for progress, and she left a lasting legacy on the world.
Her story is a reminder that greatness can come from anywhere, and that even when things seem impossible, the human spirit can achieve amazing things.
Exactly. Emily's story is inspiring, and it makes you think about all the other untold stories out there. All those people who have shaped our world, but maybe haven't gotten the recognition they deserve.
It's a good reminder to keep learning, to keep exploring, and to never underestimate the power of one person to make a difference.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure exploring Emily's life with you.
Likewise. And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon with another fascinating story. Until then, stay curious.